So speaking of 49er players, George Kittle, this is a big story throughout the offseason too. Has core muscle surgery, had a big article talking about he had lost 30 pounds. So talk about the core muscle injury and what kind of shape you think George Kittle is in now.
Yeah, so he had a what they call an inguinal groin hernia. So essentially, it's a hernia where part of your lower abdominal wall kind of herniates out through the layer of tissue that is supposed to be contained within. These can be really uncomfortable to play through, very difficult. Most of the time, when you have this hernia, the only real solution is surgery. And so there was some talk that he might have been dealing with something similar a couple of years ago. He throughout his career, dating back to 2017, he's had numerous lower body injuries. He's been on the IR for several stints. He's missed like an average of 2+ games a season over that time span. And in the NFL, it's the tight end position with the rigors and the demands of that position. It takes a toll. There's no reason to think that he shouldn't recover from this particular issue. But the question becomes durability and longevity in this league and whether or not there's going to be something up that creeps up on him. Now, that weight loss and stuff, I mean, that could have been contributed to what was going on with him. Anytime your abdominal wall is involved, man, that can mess with your intestines, that can mess with your stomach, your appetite. Hopefully it wasn't anything related to the surgery or any complication thereof. So I didn't get much information about that. But as far as the core muscle surgery and the inguinal surgery goes, that should be a quick fix, a simple thing. Those surgeries are done routinely and they're very effective to prevent future problems. So,
yeah, according to The Athletic today, is that he showed up at his typical playing weight. So I guess he put the weight back on. That was the information that I was getting there. And George Kittle, injuries are part of George Kittle. I mean, Chase, look, I have him ranked at tight end 7. I always feel like I'm too low on George Kittle because it's usually one of two factors. I know he's probably going to miss a handful of games. And I know he's not going to get consistent targets amongst the other elite tight ends, even though he can perform like the other elite tight ends. I do have him at 7. ADP's actually got him at 8. So I'm actually a little bit higher than ADP. That's not something that typically happens. Where do you got him at?
You are a 49er fan, and I'm actually higher than you are. I have him at 6. However, I will caveat that by saying I've never been a guy that's big on George Kittle redraft-wise. I much prefer him in best ball or DFS formats because like you said, we're not necessarily sure week to week if he's going to be the one getting the targets or if someone else in that offense is getting the targets. There are just so many weapons there in San Francisco, and there have been, honestly, since he's gotten there. There are so many weapons to spread that ball around to that you're never necessarily sure if it's going to be a Kittle week or not. But when he is on, he is better than just about anybody else. I wasn't worried about the injury from the standpoint of him coming back from it, just from the standpoint of, I mean, this is a guy that co-founded Tight End University. You know damn well that he's working hard in the off season. He is a professional and dedicated to his craft. And he's one of the best all around football players at the position, not just receiving, all around football players at the tight end position. So I wasn't worried about it there. And I'm still as high on him as I can be, like I said, with the caveat that I'm always higher on him in the non-redraft formats just because of his consistency.
Yeah, and just speaking to his consistency real quick, I mean, there is reason to think that he is more consistent now since Purdy's taken over. I mean, he's averaged 5.8 targets per game. That's much more consistent than what he was dealing with originally. And I think he could 0.6 touchdowns per game, which is a high amount. That's why I was second in the league at tight end in touchdowns a season ago. That's why I finished as a top 3 guy. So there has been something to be said, especially when they get in the money situations that Purdy is looking his way pretty consistently. And it doesn't hurt that when, usually Debo, Brandon Ayuk miss a game here or there and George Kittle goes off during those weeks predictably as well. Talk about another tight end who was a top 3 guy almost every single year, and then he blows out his ACL, but it wasn't just his ACL, it was also his MCL. We're talking about TJ Hockenson. So how are you feeling about this, Brian?
Well, unfortunately, it happened late in the season for him in week 16, and his surgery did get delayed because he had quite a bit of swelling in the knee, so they didn't fix it immediately, which may have worked slightly to his advantage in that it probably gave the MCL some time to recover. But he's definitely, in my opinion, going to start on the active PUP if he's not already on there. The question is going to be whether or not he gets moved to reserve or IR, and I think there's a really good chance of either one of those things happening. So I am expecting him to probably miss those first 4 games of the season. It's a lot, and it happened late in the year for him. So unfortunately, I think that's just going to make them take him back a little slower.
Yeah, just reading the tea leaves, Chase. I've been looking at this situation like Hawkinson's going to miss 4 games, and I've been projecting him as such, which kind of surprised me a little bit when I look at ADP and they still have him as a tight end 12. I mean, I get it on one hand, he's been an elite tight end producer, so you can get him as a bottom 12 tight end. A lot of times, if you're drafting a tight end in that range, historically speaking, you're streaming at the position. Now, this year's a little bit stronger than most, which is why I got him at tight end 14. It's hard for me to wrap around a guy when we have a strong tight end class, at least on paper heading into the year, to put him in the top 12 when I already know you're going to miss 4 games, or at least I'm pretty confident at this point you're going to miss 4 games. Where do you got him at?
I have him at 14. ECR has him at 15 today. And when I looked earlier today, his ADP was, he's right around like round 11, round 12 right now for an ADP. There are so many other options. If you're in a single tight end and it's not tight end premium league, 10, 12, even 14 teams, I don't think you necessarily want to bother with him. Let somebody else deal with that headache. Let somebody else have to pay the price for him and then cost themselves a roster spot by having to either back him up or have him back someone else up. Now that said, I did take him in the Scott Fishbowl. I'm trying to, shoot for the moon there, but it means that I went into that expecting that for the first at least 4 games, if not the first half of the season, I'm going to have to piece that position together. So I actually had to take 3 other tight ends as well in that format. But we're talking about a guy, the outside of the injury, we also have questions about his quarterback situation coming into this season. And so for that reason, I can't comfortably place him inside my starting tight end range, even though last year he was phenomenal, had one of his best seasons period, was tight end 3 on a points per game basis and was only slightly behind Laporta and Kelsey in that regard. So if we knew more about his injury situation, there haven't been a whole lot of updates on him. It's been kind of under the table, under the radar with him. If we knew more about that, if we had more clarification on or felt better about his quarterback situation, I might be able to argue for him a little higher. But as it is right now, if you're in a single tight end, regular tight end format, I'm leaving him out there and letting him be somebody else's headache right now.
Yeah, at the very best case scenario, as far as you wanting TJ Hockenson, you're drafting me, I think, as your second tight end with the hope you get that second half pop. Mm-hmm. That's the best case scenario, at least in my opinion, when it comes to TJ Hockenson. There's a lot of other options, like you said, I'm turning my head to. All right, the next 2 guys are maybe not the most fantasy flashy, but they are fantasy intriguing for different reasons. Tyler Higbee's flashed before, but now he's coming off an ACL injury. What's his update?
Yeah, and his was even later than Hawkinson's. It occurred in the wild card game against the Lions. So in all likelihood, he'll start the season on PUP as well. I don't see him being back even after that 4-week hiatus. If he does go on PUP, he could more likely be an IR designation, which the difference also being that when you're coming off IR, the team has a 21-day window where they can start having you practice and do some things before they make the final decision to activate you off the roster. So even if you are past that 4-game window on IR, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be back. Whereas most guys, if they're on PUP after that 4-game mark, most guys will be coming back to play. So pay attention to what they designate him. That's going to really be the deciding factor.
Yes, that's a rough one for Higbee, so we're probably not looking his way. What about your boy Theo Johnson? I mean, the tight end position just opened up wide open for the Giants now. Darren Waller finally officially retired for like the 3rd time this offseason. But Theo Johnson's dealing with the hip right now.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that if Waller wants to bag it. Listen, the Giants historically have always had good tight ends. I don't know what it is. Maybe something in the water there in New Jersey, where Dan, where you are. I don't know.
Pizza and tight ends, baby. Let's go.
But it sounds like they're going to start him on the PUP list with a hip flexor strain. It sounds like it probably occurred during either some offseason training or something, or maybe during his workouts in the offseason. I'm not really sure. Again, I think they're just erring on the side of caution here. This guy has a huge upside. They're excited about what he can do on the field. He blew it out of the water in the combine with his physical attributes and stature. So it sounds like he's going to have a significant amount of ample opportunities to prove himself an NFL tight end with Waller gone and just Bellinger lining up alongside him. So I don't think it's anything serious.
I'm glad it's not anything serious, but I didn't want him to have anything going into this. Like, I so want Theo Johnson to take over. First of all, Chase, I mean, like, except for one dynasty league, every single other one I'm in, I took Theo Johnson like by the 4th round. So like he's on every one of my dynasty leagues right now. All about it. 1 opportunity, 2 raw physical talent, 3 Daniel Jones only throws the ball over the middle of the field, so it's going to be all Malik Neighbors and then probably a tight end in the boot. Nothing against Daniel Bellinger, but Theo Johnson's upside is just through the roof. So I just wanted to see it happen. But at this point, or if you have to pick one tight end for the Giants, are you picking Theo Johnson? Are you thinking Daniel Bellinger for 2024?
Yeah, honestly, for 2024, I think I'm still taking Theo Johnson. I said in the run up to the draft, I liked the idea of him in the red zone. He's a willing blocker. He's not necessarily a great blocker, but he's a willing blocker. So I didn't think that was going to cost him time. He's a big son of a gun, which you can't teach that. And in the red zone, they need help. They need targets. Every other wide receiver on their roster, every wide receiver on their roster is a slot guy and a miniature guy. So, I mean, they need some size in that receiving game. And I like Theo Johnson from that standpoint. I'm kind of opposite of you, though. I've kind of hit in the last 2-3 years, I've hit the tight end position hard. So I've got a lot of Laporta. I've got a lot of McBride. I actually have a lot of Mayer, unfortunately. Thank you, Brock Bowers. Thanks for nothing. But I also have a lot of Daniel Bellinger because I was taking him really late that year, and then he broke his face bone, his eye side, his orbital bone, and that went by the wayside. And he would have a perfect opportunity right now were it not for the existence of Theo Johnson. I think I'm still taking an upside shot on Theo Johnson because Bellinger is not necessarily anything special as a receiver, whereas Theo Johnson has the potential to be special as a receiver, insofar as you can be special in a Daniel Jones-led New York Giants offense.
Well, yeah, and that it's just tough for rookie tight ends typically to get on the field. But this is going to be a camp battle. I'm actually going to be intrigued to watch, and probably the only one I'm going to be watching from the Giants standpoint. Brian, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. Again, host of the Injured List podcast. Let people know what you got coming out, what are you working on, and what you guys are going to have in store for us at the Expo, because we're all going to the Expo soon in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Had a lot of fun last year, and I will be on the medical panel there in Canton. So if you're around, we will be on the main stage this year, which is pretty cool. So check that out. That's going to be, I think, on Sunday afternoon. So I'll be joining the fantasy football or the fantasy doctors. They invited me to come on. Dr. Jesse Morse sent me out a personal invitation, so I'll be joining them on the panel again. I did that last year. It was really cool. Hopefully gets a lot more attendance because, as you can see from this show, you can get a lot of valuable information, and sure there'll be a lot more news to report on come Canton. So stay tuned for that. And then, of course, we got the podcast going. We got a bunch of interviews coming up. I've got a bunch of backlog things I'm working on. So I'll be releasing episodes throughout the next coming months here. Each month we'll have a new one dropping. Just did one recently, and I've got another one on the docket. So pay attention to the podcast. And then, of course, that Sports Podcast Network, TSS Fantasy, doing their weekly injury updates. We're running through the different conferences, doing injury stuff for each team with those guys on Thursday nights or Friday nights, I think. So check that out at that Sports Podcast Network.
Awesome. So again, make sure you guys go ahead and check out the Injured List podcast and check out Operation Domination. Go to the newly launched FantasySportsAdviceNetwork.com website. You can follow us there from a podcast perspective, or just download us anywhere you listen to podcasts and subscribe to the Fantasy Sports Network channel on YouTube. Make sure you hit that little bell notification, get notified whenever we have new content available to you. We will be back next week. It'll be sometime in the middle of the week. I'll let you guys know exactly when it's going to be. We got to see what's going to happen, but we're getting in. Next week's going to be August. So we're going to be full-fledged, getting you guys ready for your drafts and have a lot of exciting topics to go over for you then. So tune in for that. Follow us on social media at OP Domination FF, and we'll see you then.